Welcome to the CHYE in partnership with COL Live K Factor podcast with your host, Rabbi Yehoshua Wordy, director of CHYE. Each week we bring you interviews with amazing Jewish entrepreneurs sharing their challenges and successes. Their stories will inspire you to make the Keli to take your business aspirations to the next level.
Welcome back, everybody, to the K Factor podcast. I'm very excited this week to be sitting with someone who's a close friend and a keen business person, been involved in business for many, many years, but right now he's in the throes of starting a brand new startup, and he's on this journey to potentially building a company, God willing, that could become a national brand. And I thought it would be very exciting for all of you to hear his story as he's actively pursuing it, so that you could get like a bird's eye view of life in a legitimate startup. And as you'll hear as we go through the conversation, right now he's in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign, and you could all join in and help him exceed his finish line, God willing. And this is my good friend Elie Robinson. Elie, welcome to the K Factor podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. You know, we've been friends for many, many years, and I've watched you guide many businesses, and large businesses and small businesses. I know you worked for many years in IDT, and you have startup experience, and you're a very wise business person. But for now, we're not going to dwell on your past. Maybe we could have you back at a different time, and we could talk about, you know, your past business experiences and lessons and things you could teach to growing, you know, mid-sized businesses and stuff. Today, I want to just focus on your startup journey, because I think it's very exciting. I'm excited that you're going on this, and our listeners are going to enjoy this as well. So let's start from the beginning. Tell us how a startup idea comes into being.
So for this particular startup with me, it was part of a list of ideas that I started putting together years ago. And I had actually bought the domain for this specific space about 4 or 5 years ago, and kind of left it in a notes section on my phone, and revisited it this past summer when I was introduced to a particular connection that re-sparked the idea inside of me and would allow me to move forward with the project.
Okay, so tell us what is the idea, and what gave you the impetus to jump onto this at this time and place?
So I myself am 5 feet 7 inches tall, which by many standards is not considered short. But in the general population in America, the average male height is 5 feet 10 inches tall. And I always struggled with a problem in shopping for clothing, and soon found out from enough research that the mass manufacturers are cutting clothing to that average 5'10" male height, meaning that's where they're starting their, let's say, medium range from. What ends up happening to folks who are shorter than those heights, as you go down the scale, 5'8", 5'7", 5'5", so on and so forth, the lengths of the shirts, sleeve lengths can be way too long. And then the overall cut of the shirts, again, is tailored to a far larger man than those that are shorter than those heights. In today's world, you know, I really wanted to carve out, I wouldn't call it a niche, because there's 32 million men in America that are 5'8" and under. But I wanted to carve out and look for a space where I could help satisfy this desire for myself, and then again through the research and seeing how big of a demographic it was, try and satisfy getting better fit clothing for shorter men.
Nice. So I want to take our listeners on a journey. Every startup starts off with an idea, but then the next step of the idea is validating the idea. So you had this great idea, and it definitely was an issue for you, but how did you go about validating that it was a valuable enough idea that it was worth pursuing it in the way that you are pursuing it, and raising equity and funds, and, you know, turning it into an entire company? So go ahead.
Sure. So I'm not going to sit here today and claim that it's actually validated yet. You know me long enough. I need a bit more proof and before I'll say it's validated. However, it started by speaking around, asking questions to people, seeing if others were dealing with the same issue that I felt I was dealing with. Then it started the research phase in looking to see if there were other people out there that were trying to satisfy this for the consumer. It was interesting for us to find that there were 2 companies out there. One had been around for a few years, and one as well was started within the past couple of years. But to my pleasure, nobody had actually heard of them. And to me, others would say run for the hills. I see that as an opportunity.
So let me stop you right there for a second, because I think this is a teachable moment. I mean, it's very easy to start a startup where you're the first one going into a particular industry because there's no competition, and you get to run with it. But when there is competition, how do you make that decision if it's worth or not worth jumping into, I guess, what you could call potentially a crowded space?
Sure. So that depends on everyone's viewpoint on how they look at them. And as I alluded to before, I looked at that of seeing two companies out there doing this already as an opportunity to study what it was or was not about them that was working or not working. So, for instance, the fact that they existed and nobody had actually heard of them, to me, smells of opportunity. And they just hadn't done a good enough job of getting their name out there. The second part that we looked at strongly is, okay, we can't see their sales or if they're succeeding or not. Let's buy some merchandise from them. Let's look at it. Let's analyze it. Then let's look at all the variables that would lead a consumer to say, hey, I want to try this out. Maybe this does solve my problem. And the biggest one that hit for us was their price points. Looking at an alternative solution in the $80 range just didn't make sense to us, especially with the evolution of custom-made clothing. There are plenty of guys doing custom, and they're doing it really well, and they've brought the cost down, and they're almost at that price point. So I didn't see why a consumer would need to try them out. So this venture really started under the premise of, we're pretty sure, but we're not yet positive that people will go and test this. But certainly we don't want to put stumbling blocks in front of them. One being they need to know that we exist. And two, we can't be cost prohibitive for them trying out the product.
Okay, fair enough. So the next step along the startup journey is that you have to do a little bit of market research to sort of see if you could create something that brings, that fills those niches at an affordable, marketable price. So how did you go about? Tell us a little bit your journey. I understand you've really developed a unique product, and you had to travel around the world to sort of source it. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Sure. So let's backtrack a little bit, because what stopped me from taking this out of the notes section of my phone and putting it into actual production for years, you know me long enough, and you know that I'm not necessarily fashion conscious. Don't particularly care about the high level of appearance from a fashion standpoint. I'm happy to be wearing a pair of jeans and a casual button-down shirt or a t-shirt, and I'm quite comfortable with that. However, with that said, I didn't know the first thing, and my weakest link going into this was not knowing what it takes to actually make clothing, the inventory of clothing, and so on and so forth. So the real stumbling block moment, or the barrier removal for me, was being introduced to somebody that did have a background in fashion. And it was through the conversations with him where he immediately lit up and said, I think you're onto something. Let me help you down this process. Then it was investigating factories. Being a startup in fashion, you can't just walk into any factory and say, I want to make 50 shirts. Nobody wants to talk to you. So it took quite a bit of vetting to find the appropriate factory to work with. And then it comes down to cost. Okay, let's go investigate. Made our trip. We found a wonderful factory to work with down in Honduras, and from there it was putting all the costs together and going through the construction of an actual shirt. I keep mentioning shirts. We intend on being a full fashion brand with various pants, chinos, jeans, polos, t-shirts, so on and so forth. We started with probably the most difficult, which is the full construction of a button-down shirt. So once we gathered all of those costs together, we said, hey, we can play in this market. We definitely can bring the cost down and remove that other barrier to entry that I mentioned before.
Okay, so I understand, and I think I've noticed this as a post that you put out, that you, aside from the actual shirt, you've brought in some sort of special technology into the business that's sort of helping you form this forward. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's correct. Through our contact that I made in the fashion industry, I was introduced to a company called Fittery. And basically what they were trying to do, they had built a massive database by trying to pair up consumers online by putting in all their dimensions, much like a custom clothier would, and telling them what sizes they would fit of all the mass manufacturers. So somebody could go onto their website, put in all their dimensions, and it would tell them at the Gap, they're a size medium. At J. Crew, they're a size large, so on and so forth. I think they were a little bit ahead of their time, and the company never really took off. What they did build throughout the years, to me, was a very valuable asset in men's clothing measurements, both from the mass manufacturers as well as from all the measurements that they got from their consumer base inputting measurements online. So we bought the database from them at the end of 2017 and then started working from a data science perspective and chopping off all the customers that were 5'8" and below in order to come up with our new unique sizing model to satisfy the consumer that's under 5'10".
So that's cool. So in addition to actually creating a new product, for, you're bringing technology into it to, potentially you could use that technology to retrofit larger sizes as well down the line,
That's correct. I own over510.com as well.
So actually, by the way, we never actually said the name of your company, so why don't you just...
Yeah, sure. The company is called Under 510, which is quite literal, and that kind of speaks to the person that I am, which is usually direct and to the point. It could be at some point in time through marketing agencies or whatever that will rebrand, but for now the company is called Under 510.
Nice. So let's talk a little bit now about, getting your product out there. So you came up with the idea, you tested, you did your market research, you found the product, you came up with the product. How are you what's your plans in terms of getting it out there? Let's talk broad first, and then we'll come back and we'll hone in on what's going on right now.
Sure. So like I started with, there were two barriers to entry that we saw. We obviously believe through the pricing model that we'll be able to grab some market share and introduce a product as a viable product. Second being was fixing sizing based on that database acquisition. And then third is marketing and getting the word out there. And I've been fortunate enough to work with enough guys in e-com throughout the years and had enough growth stage success that we'll be implementing a lot of those same strategies to go out and get the word out that we exist.
Well, let me ask you like this, just because we're at this crossroads now in the business world in terms of retail, and e-tail.
Yep.
And there's some companies that do half and half. They try to get into stores, and they try to exist online as well. There's the store and there's the website. And then nowadays we're living in an era where it's the e-tail only, pure e-tail web business based businesses that have nothing to do with physical. So as I'm curious to hear your thoughts as you're journeying to build this company over here. How do you see the landscape, and what's your personal direction?
Sure. The founding way of the company is to start e-commerce only, and we do not plan on having our goods circulated through third parties. We want to be in control of the process the whole way. In order to keep costs down, again, we believe that's a huge contributing factor to getting people to convert over to try a different sizing model and try a new product that will hopefully fit them better and they'll be happier with.
So when someone comes on to buy a shirt, they put their measurements in, and then you custom configure a shirt, or there's particular sizes? Right.
So for now, this is going to be a multi-pronged approach. So for now, the way we've started was we've basically downshifted sizing models. So much like you would look at a sizing chart on a website to figure out which size you should buy, we've done the exact same thing with basic measurements that people should, or we hope that they know, in order to be able to find a size that'll fit them properly. Obviously, in e-commerce, you want to be careful and mitigate the amount of returns, so we're trying our best to get those perfected. Eventually, there's quite a few new technologies that are available, and they're getting better, using your camera on your phone, using body scans, that'll help us determine perfect fit and sizing. And those are commercially available. We've tested some of them. The results hadn't been great, so we hadn't jumped in yet, but there's new options coming out now that we're testing, and we hope to implement those on the next phase.
That's cool. one digging a little deeper on the e-tail part of it, as far as conversations that I've heard in the past, there's certain unique traits to being an online e-tail business that are very different than having a retail store. For people that are listening nowadays, as we're like in this crossroads of this changing business world from old-fashioned retail to this new world of digital. What would you say? Just what are trends that people should think of if they're thinking of an e-tail endeavor that's important for them to have in mind if they're going to try to succeed in that environment?
Well, you're losing the physicality of a purchase. There still is something to people going into a store and being able to touch, feel something, try something on that helps in conversion rates. So you're trying to account for that when you're building your e-com platform. And again, like I said, some of the technologies that are coming out now will both benefit us now, but as things continue to evolve, you could even envision down the road a scenario where people are virtual trying on the shirts with perfect or imperfect fits and deciding on their sizes, so on and so forth, so that you are completely cutting out the returns process or bringing it down to a small enough number that it's not an impact on the business. So from a technology standpoint, there's more and more things coming online these days to help with that e-commerce experience. We're not there today. So we're still working on the same basis that we were before. Yeah, so one of the things we actually believe we benefit from on the e-tail side is in-store, there probably would have been a stigma for the marketplace that we've entered into. For the females, there's always been a section in a store called petite. It doesn't exist in the male world, and there's a reason for it. Should they have put it into their stores, many men probably would have hesitated to gravitate to those areas, almost like shopping either in the boys section of a store or something a little bit embarrassing. We believe that on the flip side of that this is more tailored for e-tail because that barrier is gone.
Got it. That's a very interesting point. Very unique idea. One more thing, you didn't bring it up, but someone told me that if you want to have a successful e-tail brand, you have to build some sort of social element into it that sort of drives customers and it drives loyalty. Is that something that you're focusing on within the framework of your company?
Absolutely, and we can get into it a little more when we talk about the Kickstarter campaign. I had previously myself never been on Facebook, Instagram, or any of the social media platforms. I just don't practice on them. I'm blessed to have a great team around me, and they have pushed me out of my comfort zones in order to get this stuff up.
Let's since you brought up Kickstarter, let's start focusing on that. So you created the brand, you're getting ready to launch it, and you chose to launch using Kickstarter as a platform. I'm not sure everybody knows, but it's pretty well known. People know what Kickstarter is. It's a pretty amazing venue to crowdfunding for products. I mean, Kickstarter isn't the only platform. There's many crowdfunding platforms. Another famous one called Indiegogo, and people have been able to put up products there, unique new ideas, and they needed funding, and they were able to crowdsource funding for their products through Kickstarter. It's really amazing new world that we live in. So you chose when to launch your company using Kickstarter as a platform. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts that went into it. And right now you're actually in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign, which ends this week, and I know it's going very well for you. Tell us why you chose it, what your experience has been, and wisdom, so that people listening to this could walk away with some tangible ideas.
Sure. So there was a lot of internal debate amongst my team whether we should go on Kickstarter or just start on our own website. And the thought process was as follows, and the things we took into consideration were, number one, there was an assumption that there would be a built-in audience for people that are willing to try new things, be it on Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And so that was assumption number one. Starting with a built-in audience when you're creating something from scratch could be a nice kickstart or jump start to your business. The second was part of it being that it's clothing and there are variations of sizes of all the different fabrics, so on and so forth, not knowing what we wanted to place as our first order with our factory, being able to pre-sell and make that first order with the factory and then placing your first order for for inventory to have on hand for the website seemed like a nice attraction. So those were the assumptions going in. Some of the learning process that we had along the way were that not everybody was as familiar with Kickstarter as we assumed. Many people had asked me if we were raising money for our company, how much of our company they would own should they purchase something on the Kickstarter campaign, as well as the platform is not necessarily geared for proper e-com transactions when you're selling a product that has multiple variations to it. It became quite difficult for conversions on their site, with a lot of questions being asked on how do I get 4 shirts? How do I tell you which prints I want and sizes, so on and so forth. So, we learned quite a bit from it. Our first assumption of the built-in audience did not play out as we thought. And we ended up having to immediately implement our own customer acquisition strategy to target people to go to the Kickstarter campaign. That strategy has paid off in a big way. We're able to measure the successes. We see the successes by sending out our unique links, so on and so forth. We've been able, as of just past midnight this past night, we crossed our funding goal on Kickstarter. So we were able to implement our own customer acquisition strategies, which I would not recommend for most businesses to direct customer acquisition to somebody else's website. You want to be doing that to your own website. So in hindsight, what we learned from it was we could have just as easily opened up on our own website with pre-order of 4 to 6 week delivery time, say, and directed all the traffic to our own website.
But there is a value to like creating a goal and rallying people, I think. That's that you wouldn't be able to replicate if you did it just on your own.
That's
website.
correct, and I would say even bigger than that, there's a transparency to it, because if you launch on your own website, people do not have the visibility to see if it's moving along, how successful it is. That is a very big positive about working on either Indiegogo or Kickstarter.
So talking about customer acquisition on Kickstarter, what can you share 1 or 2 strategies that you used? When you saw that you needed to start driving your own traffic to it.
Yeah, sure. Because it's fashion, and again, my social media guys are very targeted at this stuff. Instagram plays a huge role because pictures of the actual goods or a model wearing the goods really tells a story more than anything else. And then pushing people to either purchase variations of packs that we wanted to push more than other sizes of packages that were being offered on the Kickstarter campaign. We were able to play and tweak with those variables. So it's really through Facebook and Instagram that we've been pushing our campaigns.
Nice. I hear nowadays that to a certain degree, Instagram more than Facebook has become a tremendous driver of the social media world. Are you finding that in your experience?
Again, I'm not as well versed in all of social media, but most certainly with a fashion brand, when we post things both on Facebook or post the same thing on Facebook and Instagram, the responses are overwhelming on the Instagram side. That's for sure.
Nice. So where from here, now that you've, Baruch Hashem, successfully, your Kickstarter campaign is Baruch Hashem, it's been successful, although you still have, how much longer do you have left?
I believe we have 8 days.
So people could still get in on a deal if somebody's listening to this and they want to get a shirt that fits them. And right now you could get a bargain still. You could pre-order. Where would they go?
Shirts for men under 5'10".
Okay. So now talk to us a little bit, looking at your crystal ball over here. I mean, to create a national brand that's going to become a long-term viable company, there's the pretty big moves that this is just the step number 1. Just sharing from like a 30,000 degree view, not from a more practical view, like for people that are listening to this, what type of strategy do you have to have in place if you want to turn this into a long-term viable business that's going to end up becoming nationally known? what are some of the thoughts that people have to have in mind on that?
Sure. So when we started the company, we looked for a use case example that we could compare ourselves or model ourselves after. And the best use case that we actually found was a company called Untuckit, which was really one of the more brilliant marketing plans that I've seen. Basically, they spent their money educating male consumers on telling them that they had a problem that they may not have realized they had, which was that they wanted to wear their shirts untucked. They identified why people are not doing it in telling them that the tails on the front and backs of the shirts don't look proper when you wear them untucked, and that they have solved the problem for them. And then they directed all of that traffic to their website and then to their brick and mortar stores as well. So we're following somewhat along that model. This is going to be a lot of marketing and educational process to tell men that are under 5'10" that there's a better option out there for them than buying off the rack clothing that either doesn't fit them properly or that they have to take to the tailor and spend additional funds on getting that shirt to fit them properly.
Okay, so again, talking not without getting particular to your company, but talking more on the 30,000 degree level. Again, somebody that you're working Mirza Hashem to turn this into a national brand. What are you have to build a team. You have to there's a whole ladder of things that have to get set into place. I'm talking about to begin with. In other words, obviously you have to hit certain benchmarks to activate those steps, but you have to, when you're planning and you're going to launch a company that you have a goal to be national, there's certain things you have to have lined up in order to make sure you're even able to do that to begin with. So without talking specifically about your company or giving away particularly your strategies, but what does a company have to have in mind if they think that they're going to create a business that should be able to take off nationally? What are the things they have to have in place to begin with to be able to be positioned to be able to do that?
So they're going to have we're going to have the right people in place, and it's not the team that exists today. Our first and only board member that exists right now is the chief operating officer of a major women's fashion brand called Derek Lamb. And part of the reason that I've chosen to have him on board was he has the experience of building a fashion brand. He's also a former VP of Kenneth Cole. So he's got the experience in not only national, but international brand building. And that's going to be bringing in the right people at the right time. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We're not at that stage yet. But when the time comes, we will be looking to bring in people with the right experience to take our fashion brand national and international.
Okay, nice. So just making this more personal and a little more, real to the people listening, was there any particular challenge that came up along the way that caught you off guard, and how did you deal with it?
Sure. Traveling as an Orthodox Jew in Honduras is not easy. That was definitely one challenge. The complexity of actually constructing a shirt was pretty shocking to me. How many components actually go into building a shirt, and it's so detailed. And if you don't know what you're doing, every millimeter counts, and in getting things right, especially when you're trying to build a company that's based around fit and things working properly and fitting properly. The hindrances of getting goods, let's say fabrics from China to Honduras, present their challenges. Getting things through customs. These are typical business challenges that many of your listeners may or may not be familiar with if they've been importing goods. And then getting to the practical side of things, the actual customer acquisition, which obviously you know me long enough and I've been down those paths, but creating something out of thin air is always going to be challenging. You're inventing content. You're bringing on a fully brand new space that people are not aware or familiar with. That's breaking down a lot of barriers, and it takes a lot in order to do those things, and a lot of it's trial and error. You got to be willing to put yourself out there, try things, and iterate quickly, and switch, and move into things that are working better, and follow those paths.
Okay, I'm going to let you wax a little poetic right now, in the sense of tell us a little bit about obviously you must have shopped for fabrics and shopped for how you pick your patterns. Share with us a little bit about that journey how you landed on those, the choices that you ended up choosing.
Sure. I would like to say that was me, but as I stated before, I'm no fashionista. Those are surrounding myself with good people that have good taste and have been involved with these things. Our first collection I would call a version 1.0, or a very basic collection, and it comes with a knowledge base of other people who are selling goods online, where we have a history of knowing what is going to sell best and most. If they offer 45 shirts on their sites, knowing the 7 top best sellers really helps in picking that smaller first collection.
Okay, nice. So, but just to dig in just a little bit, so just as a journey for our listeners, choosing fabric, yes. So how many options were there out there, and how did it get narrowed down to the few options you chose?
So I think we're actually fortunate. We were somewhat restricted in our first order by going with fabrics that our factory works with. Mm-hmm. So that was a limited number of collections. I learned very quickly you can get dizzy with your head spinning on how many options and variables there are out there. In addition to the fact that many of the bigger players are actually milling their own fabrics and creating their own fabrics from scratch, which once you get to scale makes sense. On the scale that we're at, does not. So by not having too many choices, I guess similar to a Costco model versus a traditional grocery store, if you have choices of 15 apple juices, the brain tends to get paralyzed. If you only have a choice of one apple juice and you want apple juice, you're going to pick apple juice.
Right. So, but all your clothing is 100% cotton, and it's finely woven, and it's...
The trend these days is actually not 100% cotton. Some of our fabrics are, but mixed in with some spandex forms for stretch and movement. Right. Is now more of the trend, which our fabrics are made out of. Okay,
so thank you very much, Elie, for sharing this very exciting journey that you're going through and the wisdom that comes along with it. All of you listening here on the K Factor, we want to wish Elie and his company Under 510 tremendous hatzlacha. We'd like to see, from Kickstarter, we'd like to see it become a national brand. For any of you that enjoyed this journey, log on and do a pre-order. Let's help fund this company so that they could start off on the right foot. Go check them out on their Kickstarter campaign at Under 510. And pick one of those options, and let's drive them to the past the finish line so that they could rocket off this new startup on to the heights that they didn't even dream that they were going to achieve. Hatzlacha Rabba, Elie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the CHYE in partnership with COL Live K Factor podcast with your host Rabbi Yehoshua Wordy. We look forward to bringing you more amazing entrepreneurs to share their stories. See you next week.